Welcome, everybody, to the Nightly News Podcast. This is Professor Paul Miller, and I am being joined today by somebody on their first podcast. I always love to say that. I always do get the opportunity to get with to have some people on the show that have never done a podcast before, so I always try to make it a fun experience. So we are being joined by the Program Director of the Criminal Justice and Homeland Security Department, Professor Johnna Whitcraft. Johnna, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
And you're here today because we are promoting the January 28th CPC Film Series, in which Professor Whitcraft will be presenting Olympus Has Fallen. So today we're going to talk more about that film, maybe how you got involved with film, why you wanted to do this, and maybe a quick teaser preview of some of the things that you might talk about. So,
okay.
Such a pleasure to have you today.
Thank you for having me.
Also being joined here by Nightly News reporter Dylan Bowman. Dylan is sliding into some big shoes to fill as our former CPC Film Series correspondent Leslie Heimbaugh has, I hate saying this, but unfortunately graduated. I hate saying that it's unfortunate that my students graduate, of course. In my heart, I love that they've graduated. It's more selfish than anything that we're losing such a wonderful member. But Dylan has decided to step into her shoes and already covered his first film series event last time with Professor Davis and Robin Hood. So Dylan, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
And Dylan, I'm going to start with you. So when you decided to get into this beat, is what we call like areas and avenues that our students engage in as part of their writing here, what was it about the film series that you gravitated to? I mean, as soon as I knew you, you were like, this is really interesting. I'm really gravitating to this. What was it about the film series that you liked so much?
Oh, that's a great question. So I'm a big history guy. I am, but I'm also big into films and history films, sci-fi, you name it. So when I heard about the fact that I could write about these films that were coming out, it was really neat to be able to have that opportunity. So that was just the biggest thing. And then also I'm kind of a little bit of a filmmaker myself, made some short films in the past, and have a YouTube channel called Fellowship Studios where all that stuff is there. And just being able to then have a different part of being able to write about that is also really big in my portfolio.
And before we get out of here today, I definitely would love to hear more about some of your films. Professor Whitcraft, so this is obviously you're a relatively new faculty member. You came aboard in 2020, correct?
Yes.
And what term did you come in specifically?
Spring.
So we were not back on campus at that point.
No.
And so your first experience here at Central Penn College as a program director of a program was when we were still virtual.
Yes.
How did that impact you and sort of getting to know your place here at the college?
It was difficult. I had Dr. Sam Morgan, who I took over for. He was great. I was able to come into the college and sit down with him and go over what was expected in my role. So that was nice. And then spring term, we actually came back. So for the first 2 weeks, because I started 2 weeks before the spring term, we weren't in person, and then we came in person. So it was nice. I was transitioning from a role where I was virtual most of the time to a role that was virtual but then coming back in person, and I prefer to be in person. I like to be in front of people. I like to, in person, I prefer to teach in person to teaching online. I'll do both. I do both. But I really like being in front of people. I really like talking to people, the interaction with people. So
it's funny because I have, and obviously I'm sure you have too, taught in all different modalities, whether it be blended or daytime or online. And we certainly understand why the online space is so important. And I frankly, in my experience with higher ed, we're very innovative when it comes to the way that we present our online coursework. That doesn't make it any easier.
No, it doesn't.
And I got to tell you, just from my own reflection, the terms that we were not here on campus was really, really devastating, not only from a student perspective, obviously, but also on a faculty perspective. I mean, there's only so much you can do in an online synchronous class through Teams or Zoom, trying to keep students engaged and keep them, paying attention, in addition to literally living during a pandemic. So that had to be difficult for you. So when you first heard about the film series, like, you were one of the people who we asked, and you didn't even give a second thought. You were like, yes, I'm totally on board with this. What was it about the film series that was interesting to you?
So my background is in criminal justice, but I have always had a passion for film. I have always been a huge film buff. I pretty much like any genre. I love Marvel, DC, any Westerns, any action movies. I've was a huge Mel Gibson fan.
Lethal Weapon.
Lethal Weapon in his early years, Braveheart, The Patriot. And
We're best friends now.
Yes, I've always loved those types of movies. And when I heard about this film series, I thought it was a really interesting way of, especially coming from that virtual. I didn't get to meet a lot of the students. I didn't get to be around campus a lot because we were coming back from that virtual setting. And I thought it would be a really interesting way, something that I'm passionate about, to meet students and become known on campus. So I thought it was very interesting, and I was very interested in it. So as soon as I saw the email, I wrote right back and said, yeah, I would love to do that. So.
Just a little bit of background about the film series, not only just for you, but for our listeners too. This was something that was it sort of was branded initially as the Humanities Film Series, and it kind of came out of our Humanities and Sciences department. And it was always very well done, well attended, people enjoyed it, but it was just an interesting way for us to step outside of our professor hat and kind of just talk about some interesting things about movies. The first one that I did, and there's actually a poster on the wall here, was of The Big Lebowski. And it's a film that I just absolutely adore and I've loved all my life. But it's different me talking about something that I'm really interested and passionate about that's outside of the course structure. It's fun, yes, educational, but still fun all the same. Now, what we wanted to do, I think it was starting in 2019, was we really wanted to branch out. Most of the people who had been interested in our area had done it. And like I said, I'd actually done it 2 times. Professor Davis had done it 2 times. But we really wanted to branch out. And the first experience that we had with that was when Professor Margie Stusky presented Erin Brockovich. And she came at it in such a different way that we did. And that's why I love where I believe the film series is not only currently, but heading. I think that we kind of took the Humanities Film Series as far as it could go, but now because we're opening it to other people, we're getting so many different perspectives, and that's what's so important to us about this. So you talked about your love of film. How did you become a film connoisseur over the years? What was it about film that really spoke to you, even in a profession that's sort of outside of the film genre?
So actually, film is what led me to my profession. My father and I started watching movies together when I was a child. I mean, I'm talking like 4 or 5 years old, and my dad and I were watching movies together every Friday night. Now, some of the movies my mother was not happy about at 4, 5, 6 years old. My dad was letting me watch, mafia movies and Braveheart and, movies that probably were not appropriate for a child, but I always found them very interesting. My dad always said they have a historical perspective to them, so he would argue that it was okay to watch them. But I started watching, the buddy cop movies, the Lethal Weapons and movies like that, and I was very interested in law enforcement. I thought it was a very interesting profession. It wasn't something that was the same all the time. You weren't going and sitting in an office, and you were out and interacting with people. And that's what led me to the criminal justice field, were these movies that I had watched as a child with my dad. And we watched movies growing up, so it didn't end. My dad and I have always watched movies. We've always, still go over on Friday nights. Now it's more TV series. We're into Yellowstone now, so we watch Yellowstone together. But we've always had that passion for films, and we always like the same kind of films. I will sit down with my mom and watch a movie every now and then, but she's more of the rom-com. She loves the Hallmark movies.
Sounds like my wife.
I can only take so many Hallmark movies because, as everybody knows, the plots are all the same.
They're all the same. There's no creativity. It's just take the same plot and put it in Duluth, right? And it's it does get frustrating. I understand why people like them because they're fun. But for me, what's interesting is Leslie and I have, over the past year, done our own film podcast. And it's called Nights at the Movies. And actually, next week, we will be releasing our finale episode because she's graduating and she just didn't have the time to commit to it. But over the past year, we've really had an opportunity to talk about some things and really shed some light on some important areas. One of the guilty pleasures was one of our episodes. And one of my guilty pleasures was buddy cop movies. And we talked about Lethal Weapons and we talked about Beverly Hills Cop. Those are some of the movies that I still look back and just adore. So what are some of the types of movies, Dylan, that you kind of gravitate to in terms of genre?
Well, kind of like I said, one of my favorite genres would be history or semi-history films, historical fiction. The Patriot is one of my favorite movies of all time. I love that one. Braveheart is also really great. Mel Gibson's just such a great actor.
He is.
I also really like some sci-fi movies. I haven't seen the Alien movies yet or anything like that, but Star Wars.
Matrix?
The Matrix, that's a pretty good one too. Lord of the Rings comes to mind too. Love those. Some fantasy movies I'm really into. Narnia's in there as well. I do like war films. That kind of ties back to the history movies. 1917, another one of my favorites. Just such great cinematography in there. But just ones that tie to history are probably my favorites.
I don't know what it is about the buddy cop genre for me that was just always kind of a guilty pleasure. I mean, I remember when I was a kid just falling in love with Beverly Hills Cop. And recently, over the break, I took some time to myself, and I sat down and they had, I think it was on IFC, they had Beverly Hills Cop 1, 2, and 3 on right back to back. And I didn't get up off the couch for those couple of hours. So let's move forward to the film itself, Olympus Has Fallen. So Olympus Has Fallen was released back in 2013. It stars Gerard Butler, Aaron Eckhart, Morgan Freeman, Angela Bassett, and a host of other recognizable faces. It was very successful at the box office, bringing in $170 million worldwide, including almost $100 million here in the United States. Tell us a little bit more about this film for those who might not be familiar with the premise.
So, without giving too much away, Olympus Has Fallen is about a Secret Service agent who is very close to the president. He is pretty much his right-hand man. He's the Secret Service agent he goes to all the time. They kind of have a falling out. You'll see in the movie. But they have this falling out, and they end up where he is no longer the president's right-hand man. The president doesn't really trust him as much anymore. And there is I don't want to give too much away I don't want to tell you the movie, but basically there's an attack on the White House. And when there is an attack on the White House, Gerard Butler, who was the president's right-hand man, comes in and kind of cleans out the White House, and you'll have to see how it ends, but
What was it about this particular movie? Because, I mean, one of the things that a lot of times it's easy for us to find presenters, but it's not as easy for those presenters to hone in on a specific film. I also did A League of Their Own, and it was something that I wanted to do. I love baseball. Love baseball. That was what my presentation was about. In fact, not a whole lot about the movie. It was more about my association with baseball. And I had a ton of movies to choose from. There's been tons of baseball movies. In fact, my favorite baseball movie is Major League. Mm-hmm. I'd also presented The Big Lebowski, which is extremely vulgar and certainly not family-friendly. And I wanted to make a bit more of a family-friendly film, so that's why I went for The League of Their Own. But it was really interesting because when I did that, Leslie also helped and presented. She had done so much research about the All-American Women's Baseball League, which is what the movie was based on, and she presented some about that specifically. When you were thinking about what film you wanted to do, I know that this was one that was at the top of your list. So why has this movie resonated with you to the point where this is what you've chosen when you could have done something like A Lethal Weapon or something like that?
So I actually was going between this movie and this one you might like this one, but Tombstone.
Oh, yeah.
Tombstone, all-time favorite. I could talk about Tombstone for hours on end. I love Tombstone. But I kept going back to Olympus Has Fallen because I think it's very interesting. I just love the way that Gerard Butler plays the character. I love it's not a family-friendly movie. It's probably a movie that my dad was showing me, or I was not 11 when this movie came out, but if I was 11 when this movie came out, my dad probably would have showed it to me. But I loved the way that Gerard Butler portrayed the Secret Service agent. I also loved that this is not how Secret Service agents act in real life. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that during my presentation, but very little of this movie is true to what would actually happen in real life. And I just liked the idea of, if something bad happens, there's this person who can come in and just fix everything for everyone. Yes. But he's not a superhero. He's just an everyday guy, and he's the guy in the background that we don't really hear much about. In the movie we do, but if he was a real-life person in the Secret Service, you really wouldn't hear much about him. You wouldn't know his name. He wouldn't be a superhero. He's just doing his job. And I think that's a lot of law enforcement these days. It speaks to that. It speaks to what law enforcement is. You're not going to be that hero, but you're going to potentially save people's lives. So
you said something really interesting there about how this movie doesn't necessarily ring true to your own experiences in this field. Do you find that the way that police officers are portrayed, either positively or negatively, or even Secret Service or different branches of the government, do you think that the way that they're portrayed in film has a positive or negative connotation to the everyday person based on the way that media portrays these individuals?
I think it depends on the movie, but in a lot of movies, most of your buddy cop movies, Lethal Weapons, Beverly Hill Cops, if real cops acted the way that the cops act in the movies, they would be fired immediately or potentially even arrested. So I think it's very interesting to watch the movies, and that's what people are thinking cops are like, when that isn't at all what cops are like. It is fun to watch, and it's fun to think that, here are these wacky cops out there doing all this crazy stuff. But at the end of the day, that's not what cops are doing. They're not trying to get into these, yes, you get into high-speed chases at times, but they're not living their lives to go do high-speed chases. I remember...
So you're saying Sergeant Martin Riggs would never happen?
No. I remember when I started, now I was a parole officer, but we do some of the same things that, you go out, you arrest people, you are going into people's homes, you get yourself into some dangerous situations. And I remember one of my mentors once telling me that at the end of the day, all law enforcement, what they want is to go home. They want to go home to their family too. So it's not about, getting into these dangerous, crazy situations. At the end of the day, every law enforcement officer wants to go home to their family. So that always resonated with me when, and I'm watching these movies, such as Olympus Has Fallen, and I'm going, that guy doesn't want to go home to his family. Like, the things that he's doing, he's not looking, his thought isn't, I'm going home to my family. And I'm not saying they won't do their jobs and they won't protect people or that they're going to run away from a fight. They won't. But at the end of the day, a real cop has a real family and is a real person. And I think that's something we forget sometimes with these movies, that law enforcement and police officers are real life people.
I totally agree. So I have seen this movie.
Mm-hmm.
At the beginning of this year, I was kind of drifting towards it, and then I was like, maybe someday, and I watched it, and I was like, wow, that was really good. Question I have coming off of that is, why did you choose this film in particular? Is the reason simply because it was the first in the trilogy? Why did you pick it over London Has Fallen and Angel Has Fallen?
Okay, so I've seen all the movies. I've seen London Has Fallen, Angel Has Fallen. Obviously, I've seen Olympus Has Fallen. The first reason that I picked it is I just think it's the best movie in the franchise. Angel Has Fallen, not too bad. London Has Fallen, I found a bit hokey. I don't know. I didn't really like that movie. It was okay. I just felt like they were trying too hard with
Gotcha.
London Has Fallen. Angel Has Fallen, I feel like they came back and realized what they had done with London Has Fallen, and they went, oh, we're going to fix it a little bit, and Angel Has Fallen was better. Other reason I picked it, and this is just completely aside, the president in this movie, his last name is Asher. My son's name is Asher. I did not name my son after the movie. My son's only 2. I completely forgot that was his name. And I was watching it when I was trying to figure out which movie I wanted to watch or talk about, and which movie that, I wanted to bring to Professor Miller. I was watching the movies, and I'm like, oh, his last name's Asher. So there was a soft spot in my heart for the movie because his last name was Asher, and that's my son's name. So.
That's awesome. It's actually kind of interesting. And before I came on the podcast, I saw that they have 3 more films set up for this series coming in future years, which is interesting.
That's insane.
Yeah, it's crazy.
So not only a trilogy, sort of a double trilogy.
Yeah, it's like a saga. It's crazy.
If you will.
I will be watching them. So.
Well, Professor Whitcraft, it's such a pleasure to have you here today, and now you can say that you've been on a podcast, so we can get that out of the way. I just really appreciate so much personally, because this is something that was not necessarily my brainchild, but I've gravitated into being the co-chair of this committee. And the passion with which you speak about this film, I just know that you're going to knock this out of the park. And I just appreciate this because, frankly, this is above and beyond what we're being asked to do here as our faculty role. This is more sort of like a passion project. And trust me, as busy as we all are, I know that sometimes it may seem like it's just one more thing, but it clearly seems that you don't look at it that way and that you really value and treasure this opportunity. So I just really appreciate your willingness to be a part of the film series. And trust me, I will do everything I can to get as many people there and support you in any way I can. So I just appreciate your willingness to do this.
Thank you. And thank you for allowing me to do this. Like you said, this is something I'm super passionate about, and I'm just so thankful for the opportunity. So thank you.
Fantastic. Dylan, before we get out of here, if you want to maybe give a quick plug to the films that you've released or where people can find those films, I'd be happy to hear it.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's Fellowship Studios on YouTube. It's also on Instagram. My newest film is called Merciless, and it's actually probably the best one I've had so far in terms of cinematography, in story, and in acting even. Not many people were involved in it, but it actually turned out to be really nice. It's an action film about someone. It's an assassin with a dark past. He has conflictions in his heart about it. I don't want to spoil the end of the film, but basically, all you need to know is he's having conflictions about his dark past and what he's doing as a living. I've made other films in the past. One was a silent film called How Much Time. Has a really symbolic base to it. And then there's a lot of the ones I made were when I was really young. The story really didn't line up. The acting was absolutely horrible. But I did make a trilogy with my Boy Scout troop called The Scout War, based off of a bunch of games. Even before I was in Scouts, apparently it began as a bunch of games that would be played in the woods.
Well, let's put it this way. If you didn't have some of those initial movies that maybe didn't resonate, you probably would have never gotten to the point where you are now.
Exactly.
So, well, check out Fellowship Studios on YouTube to see more of what Dylan's been up to. So, Dylan, again, thank you for being here today, and thank you for jumping into this role as being the CPC film correspondent for the Nightly News.
Absolutely. I'll try to fill the shoes as best as I can.
And you've already done a great job with your first effort, so I appreciate that very much. And, of course, you can read that article on the cpcnightlynews.com or in the upcoming publication that we'll have released later this month. All right, well, that's going to do it for this segment of the Nightly News podcast. Again, thank you so much, Professor Whitcraft, for being here. Thank you so much, Dylan, for being here.
You're welcome.
And we will look forward to seeing you on Friday, January 28th at the Capitol Blue Cross Theater for the CPC Film Series with Olympus Has Fallen, with the program director from the Criminal Justice and Homeland Security Department, Johnna Whitcraft. So thank you all so much for listening today. We'll see you again next time.
Hi, this is Destiny Matthews, communications major and future superstar, and you're listening to the Nightly News Podcast.
Welcome, everybody, to the Nightly News Podcast. This is Professor Paul Miller, and I'm so glad to be back here with you in the winter 2022 term. Hopefully, everyone had a wonderful holiday and a nice new year and is ready to hit the ground running in the winter term here as we return to campus. Of course, as always, on our first podcast of each term, we welcome the Dean of Student Engagement, Adrienne Thoman. Adrienne, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me. Happy New Year, everybody.
What's the word with the Pirate Life podcast? We got to ask you every single time you're on to make sure, number one, we promote it, but see what's going on with them.
Oh my gosh, we are branching out. We just did our first official kind of public appearance as the Pirate Life podcast. We presented an award at the Steamtown Music Awards.
And tell us a little bit more about that.
Oh, it was quite an adventure. It was really last minute. We weren't sure if we were going to be able to pull it all together. And we ended up going. It was a really cool kind of music festival, had all different styles and types of music, and we got to present an award.
So one of the things that you talked about is one of your goals for the year is to increase the number of downloads.
Yes.
You know, without necessarily sharing any type of information, how would you say year over year that 2021 treated you versus 2020? Major improvements?
2021 was good. We definitely saw a bump in numbers. And I'm not really sure. We all are kind of on the mindset of if we have one person that we can help to support or encourage, then it's worth it. Like, it doesn't matter if we have 1 or 100,000 people listening, but it is exciting to know people are listening.
I got to be honest that's one of the things that when we talk about in some of my classes about students making their own podcasts and things like that is really kind of to temper your expectations. I mean, you are on episode 62, if I'm not mistaken,
Yep.
and you've been doing it for a couple years. You know, you release 2 a month. And one of the things that I always try to share with students is, look, it's a slow burn. You know what I mean? You can't just come on, and unless you're an athlete with millions of followers or a pop culture icon, you're not going to be able to start a podcast and get hundreds or thousands of listeners. It takes time. You have to build an audience. And I think that's part of the reason that a lot of podcasts don't grow successful over time, because there's not that consistency level. So I not only appreciate the Pirates giving me somewhat of an extended role with the group, but I also just, it really makes my day.
Well, we appreciate having you, Producer Paul,
Well,
who has taken over the pirate joke for every episode.
So that's my job, is I have to tell a funny pirate joke at the end. I've told some good ones. So we're also being joined here by Nightly News President Janelle Dulac. Jen, welcome back to the show.
Hello, thank you for having me on.
You're always, every time I bring you in, it's you always have a really interesting quip to say, and we're certainly glad that you're here. But Jen, I want to start off with you. So obviously later in the show, we'll get to Adrienne's featured 3 events for the month of January. But I wanted to start off with a couple of things that I know that you're very involved with. And one of the things that I was hoping that you'd be able to supply us with some additional information on is the Halsa dance class that's going to be taking place during the month of January. 2 dates on the calendar, January 12th and January 19th. So be sure to follow up with more information you'll find on Student Central and Central Station. But what information can you give us about these dance classes, and how can people get involved?
So for those of you who don't know, Halsa is the Hispanic and Latin Student Association, and it is a really new group on campus, but we're trying to kind of gain more traction. But last term we had a celebration, a whole week dedicated to Hispanic heritage, and
they did an incredible job. I just have to put that in there.
I loved having to do that because, I've noticed that while there is a really diverse amount of people on campus and they come from all walks of life, there really isn't a lot of representation for the Hispanic community on campus. It's relatively large, but nobody really talks about it. And I think that Halsa existing is kind of the first stepping stone to that. But leaping off of our last panel, for example, which was really successful, we wanted to do something a little bit more and get people more involved. So this is a dance lesson that people will be able to attend. I'm not exactly sure who is teaching it, but I'm sure that they will be able to accommodate for any level of dance.
Yeah, a lot of times when you're doing those types of dance classes, now I certainly don't fancy myself a dancer whatsoever, but I know when you're doing those, especially when you're drawing from a wide group of people, you have to expect that people are beginners, So again, that's on January 12th or January 19th from 6 to 7. Please keep an eye out on Student Central and Central Station for more information on the Halsa dance class that'll be taking place in January. Another thing that I wanted to chat with you about before we get into some discussion on some other things here, Jen, is the gaming club. The CPC Gaming Club will be doing a Mario Kart tournament on January the 25th from 4 to 5 p.m. You're also a part of the gaming club. Where did this come from?
So I shamefully must say that I play Fortnite, womp womp, but I really love playing video games, and I have for a really long time. It's a really great way to connect with people, especially now that I'm so distant from most of the people that I like to talk to, from Jackson. But when it came to the CPC Gaming Club, I talked to Steve Shoemaker and Michael Pico, and they were both ecstatic to hear that a girl wanted to play Fortnite. So now we have like a whole female Fortnite team.
I love that.
I know, right? Representation. But so Gabby Perez is in charge right now of, I think she's the president. She's currently organizing a lot of the events, and she wanted to hold a poll to see what everybody was interested in doing. So there was like Minecraft building, there was Mario Kart, I think there was Rocket League. So after the vote, everybody decided that they all wanted to do a Mario Kart tournament, and so the battle is on.
Now, I am not a video game player. I was at one point, though. What platform is this on through Mario Kart? Is this through Switch? Is this through the old school Nintendo 64? Or somewhere in the middle?
This tournament, I am not sure. I mean, there's a lot of platforms you can play Mario Kart on, but if I were to guess, it's either going to be on the Switch or the Wii, because I think Michael just brought the Wii in, but most people own a Switch. Like, if they're going to bring one in, they can. But
Gotcha. I was an excellent Mario Kart player back in the day.
Ooh.
I was always Yoshi.
I think you need to be at this tournament then.
But
That
I
sounds
don't
like
play it
a.
on the Switch. I haven't even played this. It's not even fair.
That
Okay, but
sounds like an excuse.
Like, I need to know, though, Adrienne, what would you play? You look like a Princess Peach person.
I don't even know about
You
Princess
didn't-
Peach.
Oh, my goodness.
Wait. You didn't play Mario Kart
No.
on 64?
No.
That was when we
the
were
last
in
time I
college.
played video games, I was playing Dr. Mario.
Dr. Mario.
I love that, and I
Oh,
love
Lord.
Tetris. Like, those are my games.
I thought everyone played Mario Kart.
No.
For the
no,
N64.
I was not cool.
All right, so Adrienne's just an honorary Princess Peach person. For the record, I am also a Yoshi person, so we're
I
gonna have to-
love Yoshi. He's my favorite character. Of course, Mario and Luigi are good as well, but I was always Yoshi.
Or Wario. Yeah.
See, in the one I played, Wario wasn't on there. But yeah, and you know what I have played is I went to the Coliseum and they have an arcade and they have a Mario Kart arcade game. I'm sure it's actually very similar to the game that the gaming club will be playing. So, hey, you know what? It's worth a shot. I'll put it on my calendar.
I'm totally Googling Princess Peach right now.
You don't even know who Princess Peach is? Oh, man, Adrienne.
Shame. Tisk.
Okay, so again, on January 25th from 4 to 5, the Gaming Club will be holding a Mario Kart tournament, and I'm assuming that that's going to be in ATEC in the Gaming Lab?
Yes, in the gaming lab.
And then if anyone would need further information about this particular event, how could they reach out?
You can reach out to Gabby Perez, or you can reach out to Michael Pico.
So we have Gabby Perez and Michael Pico as the contacts for the Gaming Club's Mario Kart tournament on January 25th. Awesome. Well, Adrienne, we are going to move into Adrienne's featured 3 events, but I do want to make sure that we've got plenty of time to talk about some of the specific events that you're going to be discussing. So let's get that started. Adrienne's featured 3 events for the month of January. Let's hear more about it.
Well, we are kicking off the term with our traditional Back to Class Blast. It's going to be held in week 2 on Thursday, January the 13th from 11 to 1. I always love this event because all the clubs come out and we get to kind of meet and greet all the new students and get to see all the returners as well, which is fun. We're going to have pizza and some live music from Ryan Mayersky. He has not been here to perform yet, but he does like country and rock and alternative and a whole little bit of everything. So we're excited to have him.
A potpourri.
He is a
if you will.
potpourri, a musician potpourri.
A Renaissance man.
So we're going to have some live music. It's going to be in ATEC because it's cold outside. We got to be inside in all of the lobby space.
And I did see, so it's in the main floor lobby, the first floor lobby, and then you said about the ATEC student lounge area as well. So instead of in... I'm just so used to calling it club fair. And back to class blast history, we've at times used the conference center. So instead of branching out into that space, we're going to branch out into the student lounge area.
Yeah, and that's probably where I'll have the musician set up as well.
So music in the student lounge, main floor of ATEC lobby, bottom floor ATEC lobby for the Back to Class Blast on January 13th. Something else going on January 13th that we can mention.
We are going to have a mini cornhole tournament.
You do know who the first champion of the very first cornhole tournament ever was?
It wasn't Curtis Volk, or was it?
He just so happened to be my partner. So it was myself and Curtis when we beat Brian Christiana and Ian Kemmerer for the very first one. I have not had the opportunity to defend my title, but I certainly would be interested in following up with the cornhole tournament and showing everybody here my skills.
January 13th, Paul.
I'm in.
public safety might give you a run for your money.
Well, hey, you can't win them all, but I'll certainly defend. I'm still the reigning and defending champion as far as I'm concerned.
Although we don't have Kevin here anymore, and he was like the go-to for the cornhole.
Oh, Lord.
So I don't know.
I don't know. Maybe Sean Cooney will pull something out. Who knows?
Ooh, we'll see.
Okay, so again, on January the 13th, we have Back to Class Blast from 11 to 1 in ATEC. We'll also have a mini cornhole tournament later on that afternoon. The location TBD at this point, but we'll certainly, again, keep an eye out on Student Central and Central Station. Adrienne, event number 2 on Adrienne's featured 3 for the month of January.
Okay, here it is. January 28th. The next installment of our CPC Film Series, we're going to watch Olympus Has Fallen. And I love this series because I think it's super cool to learn something about each of the films and then have a chance to watch it afterwards. I always pick up new things, and I've never seen this particular movie, so...
So what's interesting is, obviously, earlier in the podcast, you heard from Johnna Whitcraft, who will be presenting on this. And here's something I didn't know about this movie. Now, I've never seen this movie, but it is the first of a trilogy, which I found very interesting and I was unaware of. But yes, there actually is a trilogy. And not only have there already been 3 films produced, Dylan on the podcast and Professor Whitcraft also mentioned they're potentially building another trilogy off of this film, which means it's almost like sort of a Bourne situation where obviously a huge hit initially and then they kind of make a franchise out of it, which I absolutely did not know about this film, and I felt very fascinated by that.
Have you ever seen it, Jen?
No, I haven't. No.
Oh, see, it's going to be new for all of us.
So, a few times ago, I got to the point where I realized that if I hadn't seen a movie by the time that somebody announced it, I wasn't going to watch it so I could sort of enjoy it along with the audience. And I remember Get Out being one of those films. When Leslie first said about wanting to do Get Out, I said, I got to watch this beforehand. I'm glad I didn't, because Leslie's presentation, even though it was virtual, really opened up my mind to the film a lot. And I still talk to Jen about this, a year and a half later, about how much that film has actually impacted me personally. And Leslie and I actually talk about that on our very, very sad finale podcast for Nights at the Movies.
Leslie, we miss you.
We have one
Come
more.
back.
We have one more episode that we recorded that will be out next week. But that being said, Professor Johnna Whitcraft will present Olympus Has Fallen for the CPC Film Series on Friday, January 28th at 6 o'clock in the Capitol Blue Cross Theater. Now, this is also supported and sponsored by Night Patrol. And the one thing I wanted to ask you, Adrienne, is you've been along for the ride the whole time that the film series has been a thing. What impact do you feel that the getting the student clubs involved with the film series has helped the film series as a whole?
I think it lets them be a part of it, get involved in it. Really, everything that we plan on this campus is for our students. So we want them to be there. We want them to be involved and be able to experience the event, to be able to have leadership opportunities where they can most of them do fundraisers while we're there and raise some money for what their group's initiatives are. So it's a really cool collab.
I got to be honest. I don't know to what extent the two of you noticed this, but for the first time, as far as I remember, when we had somebody speak to the audience before the presentation, Kristen came up and talked about the Colleges Against Cancer Club and said, it's for us, it's really just a pitch. Hey, let's, educate the audience about what your club is doing. And what was so interesting about that was when she got up there and talked about what the club does, where the funds go, and what they were going to be doing with that money, I saw like 5 or 6 people give up and just go back and give a cash donation. And I mean, obviously that's sort of an unintended side effect, but they were one of the most successful groups to date in terms of fundraising during the CPC Film Series. And that just kind of says to me, like, obviously we're going in the right direction here because that's really what we want. We want not only, of course, a fundraiser for our student clubs, but in that particular case, they were donating all of that money to, I believe it was Relay for Life. And that was so cool that they did that. And I really, really hope that we can continue to engage our student groups to continue being a part of the film series.
Agreed.
Jen, the reason that I want to bring this up with you is you are preparing in your final term to do be the second student to present at the CPC Film Series without, and again, I know we've kind of talked about this before, but why was this something that you decided you wanted to do?
I obviously am very passionate about video creation, regardless of what form that takes. And I personally, there's a lot of movies that have really inspired me over the past year or so that have made me consider the ways that I can create my craft even better. There's one movie that me and Adrienne were just chatting about that's kind of my number one choice right now, and it's entirely made by one person, and all of the lighting and the music and everything is solely created by an individual that was so passionate about what they do. And it makes me want to do that. You know what I mean? I may not be stuck in a room like they are, but, it makes me want to create something just as vibrant and just as, impactful as that is. And I want to be able to share that feeling with other people, being able to tell them how much it means to me and for them to understand why it matters.
I love hearing your excitement about that now, like hearing you kind of pumped and energized put out your own creative thoughts into the world. That's super cool to see.
I just, obviously, Jen, you've done so much here. You've made 3 documentary shorts. You were the driving force behind the first ever CPC Film Festival last year. And again, I hate to even think about next term and you graduating as well.
Listen, we're not going to talk about it, okay?
It's so sad. And I think I said the same thing when I had Professor Whitcraft in here about Leslie. Like, I always couch it by saying, unfortunately, Leslie has graduated. And that sounds awful.
Because the goal is for you to graduate.
Yes. And I just want to, and I made this point earlier, and I'm just making the caveat that I don't mean it to be unfortunately for Leslie. I mean it to be unfortunately for the college and our other students, and the impact that certainly Leslie, but also Jen, has had on her peers is just unparalleled. And it's frankly, I really just don't know how to say it without sounding unbelievably selfish, but you bring so much to our program. You bring so much to the campus life here. You bring so much to all of the other clubs that you're a part of, and there's going to be a void when you leave. So when I say unfortunately, I don't mean for you and your career. I mean really for the rest of us who are not going to be able to continue to work with you and learn from you. And it's a sad moment. Of course, we're all tears of joy when our students graduate, but it is unfortunate for others, and because we're an accelerated program, unfortunately that happens a little bit more quickly often.
I think we better get autographs now, because I feel like have her sign everything now, because she's going to go off and do great, amazing things. We'll be like, yes, I've got her autograph. She was here.
So Jen, not only is Professor Whitcraft's CPC Film Series happening on January the 28th at 6 in the Capitol Blue Cross Theater for Olympus Has Fallen, Jen will be taking the reins in the spring, and then after this one, we'll go ahead and announce that date and film, and so keep an eye out for that coming soon. And then, of course, we'll have you back on the podcast to interview you about the film that you do, and we can talk a bit more about some of your previous film creation experience.
And thank you for the kind words. I really do appreciate it. And I know what you mean, because, I've watched from my perspective people leave so quickly. I mean, my first term here, I made friends with Nick Holloman, and he was gone in 3 months. The turnaround time is crazy, and it's devastating, but, it gives more space for other people to do great things.
Indeed, and that's one of the things that I always talk about is how important it is for those students to step into those roles. If a student leaves, there's just more opportunity for others. So, Adrienne, we have one more thing on Adrienne's featured 3 to discuss.
So put this date on your calendar for the CPEC Job Fair. This is an important annual event. We provide transportation to the location for students. It is a job fair running from 10 to 2, February the 15th at the Radisson Penn Harris, which is just over in Camp Hill. And really great opportunity for our students to connect with other potential employers, network. Even if you aren't necessarily quite ready to be job hunting, it's a really good experience to go and connect and see what's available.
And we will have Steve Hassinger on later this term to talk a bit more about CPEC. But Jen, I know that you've experienced job fairs of all types, in person, virtual. Tell me a bit more about what impact those job fair experiences have had on where you are right now.
Oh, I've loved going to the job fairs. I feel like a lot of people come into it like really hesitant because they're like, oh, I mean, these people could potentially be employing me. But like, to me, I don't come in with the mindset that these are going to be my future employers. I come in with the mindset that these are professionals and they're here to chat, you know? And so like, if I were to give a tip, to talk to somebody you don't even want to be hired by first, because then it gets all your nerves and jitters out and you kind of already practice what you're going to say when you have to talk to the important people. But personally, it's been really, really beneficial with my professionalism with other people, definitely.
And I think that's an amazing point that you bring up about going up to somebody maybe that you're not interested in, just to be able to kind of break the ice for yourself. It's interesting because I go to all these job fairs and I help career services with some logistical pieces. So I always greet my students when they come in, and most of them are unbelievably nervous. And for good reason, I understand, especially if it's someone's first job fair. You want to make a good impression. But really, for me, it's all about taking you to all these job fairs, Jen, has hopefully prepared you now when, if you go to a job fair in, no matter where, here or wherever, you're going to feel a lot more comfortable because you've already done it 3 or 4 times before or more, that it's going to feel more natural to you.
And it does. I mean, it already does, like walking into a room with a bunch of people with the expectation that I am a subordinate, like having that over your head, it doesn't feel so heavy once you've gone through it so many times.
Indeed. Well, let's do a quick recap here of the events on Adrienne's featured 3. Of course, earlier we talked about the Halsa dance class. It's going to take place on January 12th, January 19th. We also talked about the Mario Kart tournament from the CPC Gaming Club on January 25th from 4 to 5. Adrienne's featured 3 events for the term is number 1, the Back to Class Blast and Mini Cornhole Tournament on January 13th. The Back to Class Blast will be from 11 to 1 in the ATEC lobbies and student lounge. The Mini Cornhole Tournament will be later on that afternoon. The second event on Adrienne's featured 3 is a CPC Film Series with Professor Johnna Whitcraft, presenting Olympus Has Fallen on Friday, January 28th at 6 o'clock in the Capitol Blue Cross Theater. Finally, the CPEC Job Fair that'll take place on Tuesday, February the 15th from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. at the Radisson Penn Harris Hotel in Camp Hill. Adrienne, now that we've listed off all of those, what do you think about the prospects of the events here in January?
Well, I know that this is just the beginning. These are just a few. We're going to be filling up the activities calendar as we get further into the term, so there will be lots of things happening. And I'm really looking forward to seeing everybody again.
Well, we are looking forward. And as always, you do such a wonderful job scheduling fantastic events here for our students. So, again, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Always
Thanks
a
for having
pleasure.
me back.
All right, well, that's going to do it for this episode of the Nightly News Podcast. Of course, thank you to Nightly News President Janelle Dulac for being a part of this and providing some insight.
Thank you, of course.
And, of course, the Dean of Student Engagement and fellow pirate,
Whoop, whoop.
Adrienne Thoman. Thank you, Adrienne, for being here. All right, that's going to do it for this episode of the Nightly News Podcast. For Dean of Student Engagement, Adrienne Thoman, and Nightly News President Janelle Dulac, this is Professor Paul Miller, and I'll see you next time on the Nightly News Podcast.